Welcome, everyone, to the Let Purple Rain podcast. My name is Joe Arpezi, otherwise known as Purple Rain. I started my CFF work in 2008, and after stepping away for 8 years, I returned in 2024 as Purple Rain. You can find all of my content at letpurplerain.com. You can also follow the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. You can really help the Spotify channel grow by leaving a 5-star review, and you can also follow me on X at UW_purple_rain. That is spelled REIGN. That is the best place to follow to get the most updated news, find out when I'm releasing new information. I also release repost content from other great content creators, CFF analysts in the CFF space. I try and give you guys as much information as I can there, so I'd highly recommend following on X. And, before we get started here, I'm going to go through the same announcements I've been doing for the last couple of weeks. We are back in the regular season for CFF, and to give you that idea of what you can expect every week at letpurplerain.com, what you will see from my weekly content is that on Mondays, I will release my waiver wire targets article. On Tuesdays, I will release my player rankings. On Thursdays, the podcast will be released for Start Em, Sit Em, as you're watching or listening right now. And then on Saturday, I'll be doing my player prop spotlight. Premium subscribers get full access to all of this content. If you are not a premium subscriber, you can sign up for a 7-day free trial to get a taste of everything that I have to offer. Of the items that I mentioned that I released throughout the week, I have a free preview section for everything except my player rankings on Tuesday. That is exclusive for premium subscribers. And we are watching the Start Em, Sit Em show here for week 3. You can, YouTube and Spotify will be the home of my Start 6 suggestions for the week. LetPurpleRain.com will be the exclusive home where I answer your submitted questions and help you create the best lineup. Every week, I put out threads on Substack and on X asking for you guys to submit your Start Sit questions. You can leave comments in there with your questions, and I will include those in that submitted questions show so I can help you guys out. Now that we got that out of the way, let's dive into some college fantasy football. I'm going to start things off here with my quarterback picks. And for those of you that are new, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, I will go over 3 players at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. I will give a start 'em or sit 'em recommendation. I'll go over the players, what Vegas is calling for that team to score during the week. I give a fantasy matchup grade based on how the offenses and defenses match up. And then I go over defensive stats. I call them efficiency stats, advanced stats. But checking my volume there. Sorry, guys. What I will do is go over these advanced stats, which right now we only have 2 weeks in the books. Some of them I will lean into heavier than others. We don't have, we haven't had enough games where the strength of schedule starts to balance out some of these stats. So you might have some big time teams that have played a bunch of like a FCS school and a really lowly group of 5 school. So their defensive stats are going to look really good. I will kind of comment as we go how much weight I'm going to put behind those advanced stats. But I do like to go over those, something that I feel like makes the show a little bit different. And I want to give you guys as much stats behind my decision-making process as possible. Going into the quarterbacks here, I am going to start off with a very popular name from this last draft season, Lenoris Sellers from South Carolina. He is taking on Vanderbilt. Vegas is calling on South Carolina to score 26.5 points. I actually have this as a D-plus fantasy matchup grade. And I do want to say this here. Everyone except for my next pick, I'm going to be going over the passing fantasy matchup grades and passing stats. These are all dual threat quarterbacks, but one of them, my second pick, is mostly a running guy. So what I'm going to bring up there is going to be running based. But for the Lenoris Sellers, from a passing standpoint, I see this as a D-plus fantasy matchup. The Vanderbilt defense has not played any really good opponents, so I'm not going to put a ton of weight in these advanced stats. But Vanderbilt has only given up 0.5 passing touchdowns per game. Their red zone touchdown conversion rate is 50%. and they're giving up third down conversion rate is 33%. So those are not great numbers. The passing touchdowns allowed is a really bad for this matchup. The red zone conversion rate, third down conversion rate, those are average. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, I like to color code these stats. So dark green is really good for the fantasy player. Light green is pretty good. Black is just average. Light red is getting bad. Dark red is really bad. And I'll kind of explain that out and verbalize it out for you as well that are only listening on Spotify so you guys can all get exactly how these things match up here. But with Sellers so far, he's not been performing that great in his first 2 weeks. He has had some quality opponents to look at. He hasn't just been playing little schools. So that's one thing that I think you have to be a bit cautious on with Sellers. I think he's kind of in a bout of you need to wait and see him do really well, I think, before you can feel safe putting him in your lineup. If you just your hands are tied, you don't have other options, I can understand that one. So a lot of what I'm commenting on here is about if you have anybody that you can throw in there. I'm not a big fan of Sellers this week. Like I said, the fantasy matchup grade is not very good. Um, and I will admit too that fantasy matchup grade that gets based on how well one team's offense matches up with the other team's defense, and I think that strength of schedule for Vanderbilt is kind of making it a little top heavy and pushing it towards such a bad grade. But it's just the way it's statistically kind of how I come up with it. I have a system with that, and so it's one of these things. I'm just going to say if you've got those other options, leave Sellers on the bench, put somebody else in there, and let's take a wait and see approach with Sellers. So for quarterback, Lenore Sellers, South Carolina, sit him. My next pick, and the stats I'm going to be going over will be rushing based, is Colton Joseph, Old Dominion. They are taking on Virginia Tech. Vegas is calling for Old Dominion to score 21.5 points. But from a rushing standpoint, I give this an A minus fantasy matchup for Colton Joseph. Virginia Tech is giving up 2 rushing touchdowns per game. That's pretty good. The A minus is really good for the matchup grade. And then the red zone and third down conversion rates are really good for Joseph here. Virginia Tech is giving up red zone touchdowns 71.4% of the time, and they're giving up third downs 47.4% of the time. One thing that I like about Colton Joseph here is that we've seen him be productive regardless of the quality of opponent. I was very surprised at the fact that he was able to have fantasy value in week 1 against Indiana. I think Indiana is a better defensive team than Virginia Tech. And so we've been able to see him do it against a similar type opponent. And then we have all of these great numbers backing him up. So this is what I'm going to throw out there. Don't be afraid of the fact that Old Dominion is playing Virginia Tech. Colton Joseph showed us in week 1 he can get it done on the ground with almost no production in the air. And if they're playing from behind, he should be throwing the ball more, but that's also going to give him more chances to tuck the ball and scramble and get those extra rushing yards. So Colton Joseph, Old Dominion, start him. My last pick here is Marcel Reed from Texas A&M. They are taking on Notre Dame, and Texas A&M is being projected to score 20.5 points. We are going back to passing numbers here. For fantasy grade, I am looking at this as an A minus, which is really good. The Notre Dame defense is giving up 2 passing touchdowns a game, which is pretty good. And red zone conversion rate is 50%, which is average. Their Notre Dame's third down conversion rate's not very good here for Texas A&M, being 30.8%. So the conversion rate stuff, we're at average and a little bit below average here, a little bit on the bad side. But the passing touchdowns per game, the fantasy matchup in the air is very favorable for Texas A&M. The ground game for Texas A&M hasn't really been clicking like some of us thought it would this year, but the passing game has. The passing game's been the strength of this offense. So I think Marcel Reed has the ability, and he's got the receiver options to be able to take advantage of this Notre Dame defense. I think the biggest thing is how much time can Texas A&M give Reed in the pocket? And Reed has the athletic ability to escape the rush, to potentially pick up scramble yards. How's Notre Dame going to handle that? Are they going to be having to pull an extra guy either out of the rush to be a spy or an extra guy out of the coverage to be a spy? I think they're going to have to do that which will help open up some opportunities for Texas A&M here. So another surprise option to some people, but when you look at Marcel Reed, Texas A&M, I'm going to say start him. I'm going to take a sip of water here before we get on with the running backs. The first stop I'm going to go to here with the running backs is Damari Alston, Auburn, who's taking on, South Alabama. Vegas likes Auburn in this one quite a bit. They're projecting them to score 39.5 points. Alston was banged up last week. He is looking like he's probable to play and should go right back to being in the starter. It could affect his workload. So that's one thing I do want to say. They might put him out there, but they might give him like 75% of the workload he was normally getting. But with this matchup, I think it's okay. Every single metric I'm going to bring up here is really, really good for the Auburn rushing matchup. From a fantasy grade perspective, I give it an A+. South Alabama is giving up 3 rushing touchdowns a game. They're also giving up touchdowns in the red zone 85.7% of the time. And one thing I'm going to do that's a little different here with running backs compared to the other positions. I'm not going to go over the third down conversion rate. I'm going to go over rushing yards per carry allowed by the defense because I do think that's a better metric that we can look at. And the South Alabama offense is giving up 4.8 yards per carry. These are, for all of you guys watching on YouTube, that's dark green all the way down the line. That is what you dream of when you're looking for a fantasy matchup here. Like it doesn't get any better than this. I think they're just going to pound. They're going to just take advantage of South Alabama on the ground. So Damari Alston, Auburn, stardom with an exclamation point. My next choice here is Kanye Udo from Arizona State. They are taking on Texas A&M, and Vegas is calling on Arizona State to score 37 points. Fantasy matchup grade, I gave this a B+, which is pretty good. I really do like the way that the matchup favors, Arizona State here. Texas State has played, I believe, UTSA and an FCS opponent. UTSA has a really good running game, and they took advantage of this rush defense last week. And that's why we have a lot of good numbers here that we're seeing. Texas State is giving up 2.5 rushing touchdowns per game, which is really good. They're giving up red zone touchdown conversion rate 66.7 of the time. 66.7% of the time. That is a pretty good number. And they're also giving up 5.8 yards per carry, which is a really good number. Arizona State is splitting up their carries. They are making sure to work 2 guys. Last week, there's some injuries in the backfield. Kanye Udo was getting more carries than we've typically seen, and it looks like the injury situation is going to remain the same this week. So he should be able to get 15-plus carry workload. So with this matchup here, I think it's kind of a no-brainer. If you're in a deep league, you're looking like you need help to find a flex, or you're in an all FBS league, I'm going to recommend Kanye Udo, Arizona State, start him. My last pick here is Anthony Hankerson, Oregon State. They're taking on Texas Tech, and Vegas is calling on Oregon State to score just 18 points. From a fantasy matchup grade, I gave this a D+, which is not good. Texas Tech is only giving up 0.5 rushing touchdowns per game, which is really bad for fantasy-wise. The one thing that's good is that they're giving up a touchdown 100% of the time that an opponent gets into the red zone, but they're only giving up 1.9 yards per carry. Now, these advanced stats, Texas A&M has not played very good opponents, so that 100% touchdown conversion rate is a nice number to see. But one problem that's been happening is that Texas Tech has just been jumping out on teams. The game script is changing to where their opponents can't just continue to grind the ball. They have to throw the ball more to play catch up. Anthony Hankerson can get in PPR leagues. He can get you some of that receiving value. So he does help you out a little bit there where he's not going to be completely terrible. But I don't like this matchup very well. They're going to be playing catch up. And even though I'm not putting full weight behind these advanced stats, they do not help one bit for when it comes to this matchup here. So I'd recommend if you got Anthony Hankerson from Oregon State, sit him. Take another sip of water here. At the wide receiver position now, I'm going to start things off with Corey Milliner from UAB, who is taking on Akron. Vegas is calling on UAB to score 33 points, and Milliner is someone I became a believer in after week 2. Week 1, UAB did not play a quality opponent. I didn't know how much I really wanted to trust the UAB passing game, and especially Kitna at quarterback. I wanted to see him do it against a better opponent. Last week, I think we had a better sample to be able to judge that by. And so I'm kind of all in now. I'm a believer in this UAB passing game, and Milliner as an effect of that. From a fantasy matchup perspective, I give this an A minus. Um, Akron has given up 2.5 passing touchdowns per game. Both that and the fantasy matchup grade are excellent numbers. Um, Akron is giving up touchdowns in the red zone 54.6% of the time. That's an average number. And a third down conversion rate of 56.7, which is really good for us here. This is just one of those. Akron's obviously not a very good team. Akron also gives up yardage and efficiency on the ground. And even though the UAB rushing game is not like they're capable here with Javon Jacob, um, what we're really seeing from them is that they emphasize the pass first over the run. So I do think when it comes to scoring opportunities, and we got a 33-point projected score for UAB, Milliner I think should be good for at least getting one of those. So this is one that I feel like is pretty straightforward. And really, I'd say anybody that you have that's a decent fantasy asset, if they're going up against Akron, you can pretty much just start them. But we're going to warm things up with an easy one here. Corey Milliner, UAB, start him. My next pick here is Victor Snow from Buffalo. They are taking on Kent State. Vegas is calling on Buffalo to score 35 points. And I've given this fantasy matchup a B+ grade, which is pretty good. Kent State, their numbers are a bit up and down based on the quality of opponents that they've played, but I think I'm going to kind of take some of this at face value. I like the fact that they're giving up 2.5 passing touchdowns per game. That's a number I'm willing to hang my hat on. That's good for Snow. Their conversion rate stats, I do think those, I'm going to give some weight, but not total weight behind these. Red zone touchdown conversion rate is only 40%. That's not very good for us here. Third down conversion rate is 33.3%, which is about average. And one issue that we have to worry about here is the Buffalo ground game. They should be able to run on Kent State. L.J. Henderson is going to get touchdowns. So right here, they're calling on 5 touchdowns to be scored in that. If L.J.'s having his way on the ground, and that Kent State defense is going to have to drop a safety in the box, they're going to have to play a one-high look and create one-on-one matchups on the outside, I have a feeling Victor Snow is going to get some passes to take advantage of those one-on-one matchups, or to try and use passes to him to loosen up that defense and try and get them to pull that safety back to open up the run again. So this is one of these things where, although not all of the advanced stats are really in Snow's favor, I wanted to throw out someone who you could find in deeper leagues, or like I said, maybe you're struggling to fill your last wide receiver spot, a last flex spot, and I thought, this would be a pretty good option to go over here. So Victor Snow, Buffalo, start him. I mentioned Texas A&M earlier, and so this is kind of a little 2-for-1. You could say I'm cheating a little here because it's all the same stats that we mentioned before, since these are passing stats. But I really like Mario Craver, Texas A&M, in the matchup against Notre Dame. They're calling for about 3 touchdowns, but as I stated before, Texas A&M, I think they're going to be just like what I predicted from Miami in Week 1 against Notre Dame. They're going to have to go to the air to move the ball and to score points against this Notre Dame defense. Craver's been getting the majority of yards. I like him best between him and KC Concepcion. So I decided to throw him out there here. And just once again to go over like the good stats of this matchup. It's really good from a fantasy grade perspective. I gave it an A-, and it's pretty good with the fact that Notre Dame's giving up 2 passing touchdowns per game. That third down conversion rate of 30.8% is not very good. That's the one thing that might be the Achilles heel, and might be partly why why Vegas is calling on Notre Dame to only give up 20.5 points. But I'm going to stick with this, being optimistic about Texas A&M in this matchup. I'm going to say Mario Craver from Texas A&M, start him. Wrap things up here with the tight ends on the main show. I'm going to start with Michael Trigg, Baylor, who's taking on an FCS opponent. Michael Trigg got everybody's eyes in week one, but he did leave that game with an injury. And I believe he sat out last week with that injury. And right now, I believe he is considered questionable or day to day for playing this week. I don't know if it's been upgraded to probable yet. But people that picked up Trigg after the week one, after week one on the waiver wire, they're itching to find a game to throw him in here. Um, and you see an FCS opponent, and I give this a fantasy matchup a B plus grade, which is pretty good. It's an FCS team. I don't have any advanced stats on them. This I think is a tricky call, guys. One issue that I have with the Baylor passing game is that this should be a week where the Baylor running game gets on track and they may steal too many scoring opportunities. That's one concern that I have with this matchup, and this will apply to any of the pass catchers, not just Trigg. So one worry I have is that the rushing game may get half the rushing touchdowns, which it's not been getting near that number so far this season. The other thing too, the tight end position tends to get leaned on more in tough competitive games. In games where they have a massive talent advantage, they can just toss the ball out to a wide receiver, or they can just spread the ball out to everyone. And it's hard for some guys to maybe get enough of a workload to put up big numbers. And for the tight end position, they're not breaking a lot of big ones where they can potentially get like a long bomb touchdown on one reception. So you kind of do need to rely on a higher volume with tight ends and then just hoping for those couple of red zone look opportunities to get your touchdowns. Trigg very well. I mean, he could have a really good day. He could go 3 catches for 25 yards and no touchdown. That risk is one of those things that I'm going to say, if you have another option here that could be good this week, I would say sit Trigg and wait to see him come back in a game and see how they target him again. Because we also saw Ross got, I believe it was Ross, Cole for Baylor. The wide receiver got a bunch of targets in week one, didn't get the targets in week two. So there's also some issues I think that you have to look at of the target share is getting divvied up differently week to week. So we can't guarantee Trigg is going to get the same percentage of targets that we saw in week one if he is fully healthy. So I'm going to say if you have better options out there, and we hear that Trigg, and even if you hear Trigg is good to go, I'd recommend Trigg, sit him. All right, going next here, I'm going to go with Isaiah Cummings from Appalachian State, who is taking on Southern Miss. Vegas is calling on Appalachian State to score 25.5 points, which I think might end up being a little low. I've given the fantasy matchup for this one a B, which is pretty good. Another number which is pretty good is third down conversion rate, which is 43.3%. Southern Miss is giving up touchdowns 80% of the time in the red zone, which is a really good number for this matchup. The one thing that's not good, but Southern Miss, where I am going to put some weight in this, I had to think and remember their matchups. I am going to put weight behind this defensive passing touchdowns allowed per game because they did play Mississippi State, a team that could really throw the ball and put up touchdowns. And even despite playing Mississippi State, Southern Miss has only given up 0.5 passing touchdowns per game. That is a bad number, really bad number for this matchup. So that's the one thing that I think could be tricky here. And I do think that the Appalachian State, the matchups that I see that actually are the best, as good as these passing numbers are for the Appalachian State offense, I think the rushing matchup is even better. So I could see Appalachian State really having a lot of efficiency on the ground, and then the passing game might be a bit more complementary. But I could see this potentially as a close game, not a big blowout, 1-2 scores, things stay balanced. That's the sort of game that helps tight ends, where they tend to get targeted a little more when those defenses are trying to take away wide receivers or they're focusing too much on a running back and the tight ends can slip out and play action. So my gut tells me this could be a good week. If you don't have a superstar, you're juggling week to week plays at the tight end position. I kind of think here that Isaiah Cummings, Appalachian State, is a good stardom pick. My last suggestion here. I'm going to go with Houston Thomas, UTSA. They are taking on an FCS opponent. Um, because this is an FCS, Vegas has not given a spread on the game. We don't have any advanced stats to go off of. All we have is my B minus fantasy matchup grade, which is pretty good here. One thing that I am worried about in this game, the UTSA running game is really good. They could just steamroll this FCS team. Another thing that I'm not liking here, I don't think the passing game is clicking as well as we expected, and Devin McEwen is dominating the target share. We are not seeing the ball kind of getting distributed and bounced around as much like we saw last year. So Houston, I think, is getting like 2 or 3 targets a game. I don't think that's going to be enough. Maybe he could get a red zone, look, but in this game, UTSA may not need to throw the ball in the red zone. They could just probably hand it off and just ram the ball in every single time they reach the red zone. So I think this is one of those where even though it looks like a good matchup on paper, I have a feeling the way that the run pass game will go is that it may not give enough opportunities for Thomas to give you enough fantasy value this week. So for my very last suggestion for the week, I'm going to say Houston Thomas, UTSA, sit 'em. That wraps up here my selections for this week's Start Em Sit 'em podcast episode. Each week I post a thread on X and Substack asking for your start sit questions. If you want help with your lineup, please join in the discussions in one of those 2 areas. Submit your questions to me. I don't care if I answer one of your questions the week before. Submit your questions anyways. I would prefer to only have 1 question per person, but I know some people, sometimes they just can't decide. They have 2 questions, they can't figure out which is more vital. I would say it's okay if you put 2 in there. You need to tell me which one's the first priority, and there is no guarantee I'm going to answer both. But if I don't get a full load of questions, and this is why I say, even if you submitted your question last week, still submit your questions to me, because if I don't get 10 other ones, I'm going to throw them in there. So you might get lucky and I might answer both of yours, or I might get flooded with a lot of questions. I answered your questions last week, and I'm just going to have to make you wait another week as I spread the wealth to make sure I get as many people as I can help as many different people on the show from week to week. So I'm definitely going to recommend, guys, go in one of those 2 places, submit your questions. I've got a link in the description below. And you've been listening to Start Em Sit 'em. Please follow on YouTube and Spotify. Thanks for joining the Let Purple Rain podcast. Your CFF Reign starts here.